Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mathilde and I am the person in charge of marketing here at Amity. So for today's webinar, we are joined by the awesome Linda Schwaber-Cohen, who is the head of training at Skilljar. So naturally, today's topic is building a customer onboarding program, the keys to success. And we're really excited for everyone to see what Linda prepared. I got an early peek and I'm really excited for everyone to see. So, Linda, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. Welcome, everybody.
Awesome. Great. So, just before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping notes to share with everyone. We will be on Twitter. So, join the conversation, use the hashtag CSWebinar, and you can tag us at GetAmity and at Skilljar. And if you see a slide you like, a poll you like, something like that, take a screenshot, share it on Twitter, and we'd love to engage with you. And at the end of the webinar, we will be doing a Q&A session with Linda. So in your GoToWebinar side panel, there is a question box, and you can send us your questions in there at any time if you'd like, and we'll come back to them and answer them at the end. And as usual, we will be sending the slides and the recording to everyone who registered. So keep an eye on your inbox, and by soon, I mean sometime before the weekend. So if by Friday night you haven't received anything, I would recommend checking your spam folder and email me if you have any questions and if you want to get the link and didn't get it or anything. So yeah, and I just want to take a very short minute to introduce Amity for anyone joining us today for the first time. So Amity is a customer success management platform, and we allow CSMs to retain and grow their customers by doing things like monitoring health scores, engagements, and more. And the Amity tool can also automate engagements and playbooks and things like that. So if you want to take a look, see what we integrate with, see a demo or anything, head over to the website, getamity.com, and you can click request a demo on there. And that's it for me. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Linda, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks again for having me, and I'm really excited to dive into the topic today. And before I do that, just a note about Skilljar. So I manage training here at Skilljar, and Skilljar is a modern learning management system, and we help our customers accelerate product onboarding and adoption and drive customer engagement. And we do that through modern training experiences backed by data. So we work a lot with customers who are building onboarding and training programs, and that's really where my wheelhouse lies, my expertise lies, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll talk about the essential components of every customer onboarding program. I'll present a few tips and tricks for improving the onboarding experience for customers, and we'll talk about how to lay the groundwork for customer success throughout the onboarding process. And throughout this presentation, I would really love to hear from you. So if you have any questions or comments, please write to us in the question box in the chat box, and we'll try and address them as quickly as we can throughout the presentation. Otherwise, we'll save them for the Q&A. So please do engage, and we have a few polls throughout that we'll ask you to answer as well. So I always like to start by just framing the onboarding question. Why is onboarding important? And I love TSIA, State of Education Services report. It comes out every year. And this year, they reported that 64% of respondents at companies said that learners use the product more post-training for all modalities of training. So investing in an onboarding program can really help increase usage of a product. And in addition, with regard to renewals, and I know a lot of us in the customer success realm are really focused on renewals in particular, the product subscription renewal average for a trained customer is 92%, while for an untrained customer, it's 80%. And that came from last year's TSA, State of Education Services. So there's some significant benefits to the business in investing in a structured onboarding program and training program. And then there's the basic order versus chaos argument as well. And you know that a customer signs on to your business, they purchase your product, and you have an opportunity to present order or chaos. And success can happen by accident, right? Sometimes people are just surprisingly successful, but that's introducing a lot of risk into the business. And we're all here to really put a plan in place to create order and predictability in our customers' relationship with our companies. So anytime that we know that if we do certain things, it will help drive success, that's definitely something we want to invest some time in. So today we're going to talk about the keys to onboarding, as I mentioned, and I think of onboarding really as the entire experience of getting acquainted with a product and a company. So it's not only just a training session, it's really an end-to-end experience, that first introduction through adoption. And there are a few specific components of an onboarding process that we want to make sure we include in order to really promote customer success and drive success, prescribe it, and make sure it doesn't happen by accident, but because we did certain things. So I like to talk about the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps here are people, process, and product. What do I mean about the 3 Ps of onboarding? So for people, I think, who's involved in onboarding and do they know what they're supposed to do? And that's really related to the company. So your team, the sales team that's passing people on to you. And we'll talk in much more detail about that. And then the second P here is process, which is what exactly is the customer supposed to do? What process have you put in place and they know that these are the steps for onboarding and these are the steps to success? And what exactly is the business supposed to do in order to promote that process? And then the third P is product. And I am actually not talking about the actual product that the customer purchased. So in our case, it would be SkillJar, in Matilda's case, Amity. I'm not talking about the product itself. I'm actually talking about the product that the customer success team provides. You provide great services and maybe great training services or educational services. And it's really important to think about specifically what products your team is providing and what you're giving to your customers to help them succeed. So let's dig in. So first of all, I want to launch a quick poll. So let me go ahead and launch that. And I want to know where your onboarding program currently stands. So we have a few options here. So you should see it right now. I just launched it. You have a set program in place, you have a program, but you want to update it, or you're just starting to build out your program. So take a moment and reply there. The replies are coming in really fast. And this is really interesting because it looks like a lot of people have some sort of onboarding program in place, but they want to update it, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of the time you start scaling and you realize that there are new things that you have to start thinking about. There's a few people who have a set program in place, and there's about a little over 30% who are just starting to build out their program. And I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. A lot of you voted, so I appreciate that. And I'll just share those results really quickly, and you can see here. So the majority of the folks here have some program and want to update it. So that's really good. And actually, a lot of these pieces will be really relevant, I think, to all 3 groups, but that's a really great place to be in where you're really looking to evolve your program. So let's start by talking about the people component of this onboarding process. So when I talk about people, as I mentioned, I'm talking about the individuals on your side and who they are, what they're going to be doing. And one of the key principles of the handoff, in my opinion, is really to keep it simple. I've seen lots of companies who really involve lots of stakeholders right at the very beginning, and it's very confusing for the customer who they'll be interacting with, what their roles are, why they should reach out to different people. So it's really important that you explain that and the customer understands exactly why they're going to go to each individual. Additionally, handoffs, the nature of handoffs is that they're difficult because you're trying to get many different people in your company to walk the same walk and act the same way and do the same thing, and everybody has to be on the same page. So you have that challenge where I've met some account executives in my career who show great care and concern around making sure the handoff gets done properly. And they're really invested in the handoff and in customer success. But there are other account executives who really are just lobbing customers over the fence. So you have to really put in that process to accommodate for the different variety of individuals that may work at your company. And that's the same for the CSM world. So some CSMs are really organized, whereas others may have difficulty making sure that everything happens the way it needs to. So that's why really keeping the handoff simple and making sure that everybody knows exactly what they're doing is going to be really important. And additionally, most customers telling them one thing one time is often not enough. A lot of the time, it's really valuable to provide information in multiple formats multiple times. So if you're telling them, that's one thing, but we're going to want to make sure that everybody knows who their team is, especially if you're focused on partnership, which I know a lot of people who are really invested in customer success are. You're going to want to make sure that you're providing that information. This is who you go to for this reason. And that can be an easy document or a packet that you hand out at the handoff, for example, that the account executive sends, or maybe it's the first touch that the CSM sends with an introduction, and this is what I'm here to help you with. And then, as I mentioned, you have to have everybody singing the same song. So you're really going to want to invest time in training your team on the handoff. There are a few things that get done well without any kind of practice. So really practice it with them. And that might include a training session with your teams. That might include reference docs or SOPs, standard operating procedures. I can tell you that at my last role, we had many different CSMs and AEs, and I just had a great SOP that everybody would keep open every time they were doing the handoff. So it was just really easy for them to come in and say, okay, these are the steps. This is exactly what I need to do. It had all the templates in it. So it just made it really simple for everybody to do everything right. And you really want to make things as simple as possible, especially when you're involving so many stakeholders, and especially when it's your real customer's first impression of that customer journey. And the last piece with regard to the handoff is retaining customer information. And Amity helps with this, and maybe if you're Salesforce users, you can use Salesforce to retain customer information. But really, organizational memory is so key to the customer experience, and there's no reason that your CSMs should be having the same conversation that your account executives just had with this customer. So whether that's a handoff doc or can everybody hear me? Sorry, if you can, I just got word that perhaps the sound is off. So if there's no sound, can you just let me know in the chat?
I can hear you okay. Oh, I think we're getting feedback that everyone's hearing okay. If anyone's having audio problems, seems like no one here in the chat is saying that, but maybe try logging back in, everyone. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great, perfect. If anybody's having audio problems, yeah, that's a great approach. You can log out and log back in, and maybe that will help. Sorry about that. Perfect. So retaining that customer information, that's where I was. Just make sure that all the key questions, all that key information is getting passed along, and that requires some sort of system. So whatever that might be, as I mentioned, maybe it's Amity, maybe it's a Salesforce record, maybe it's a Google Doc, a spreadsheet that everybody knows that this is where we retain information. That's fine. Just make sure that people are getting what they need, and they don't have to repeat themselves. So that's really the first P, that people aspect. And then we're going to move on to this next P, which is process. And I can't emphasize how important it is to map the journey of onboarding to your customers and surface it to them, because you really want people to do something, and it's really hard to get people to do the things you want them to do if they don't know what they're supposed to do. It's a really basic concept here, but I see it always just kind of everybody rolling with the punches, and there's no real journey, and there's no real commitment or buy-in from the customer, and things are disorganized. And just going through the process of mapping that journey and servicing it really helps with that, and really helps you move customers along in that journey. And at this point, you're going to want to make sure that you know what the customer needs to be successful. And sometimes, especially if you're a new customer success organization, there might be a lot of questions around this. You might not actually know exactly what healthy customers do, or exactly what behaviors you need to drive. And if you're in that position today, I really recommend you take some time and try and talk to your product team, and talk to the people who do have that information or are also invested in getting that information. And usually I believe in a really data-driven approach around understanding how people are interacting with your application. But once you've figured out exactly what somebody needs to do to be successful, that's how you can really surface it to them, because they want to be successful, especially at this point in their customer journey. Your customers bought your tool, they're invested, they want to see value out of their purchase. So it's an opportunity to really just map that journey and surface it. So in this example journey, it's as basic as like a kickoff call, a basic training, a second basic training, an implementation checkpoint, for example, an advanced training. If you have a very lengthy implementation process, so some people might have lots of setup to do on technologically speaking, then you're going to want to include those kinds of things in a project plan as well and provide it here. And maybe your journey would have those project checkpoints where you're coming in and making sure that everything's on track, that everybody knows what actors are needed. So this process component is going to be really important. And here's another example of kind of the same thing, but just a little bit more detail, where we have the kickoff call and then there's some on-demand training, and you can see that there's very clearly the who here. So who is going to be doing this on my side, the company, and who is needed from the customer side for this activity. So maybe that's all users from the company and you're doing a large scale training, or maybe this is just the champion and really you're just assessing how things are going and you want to make sure that everything's on track and the kind of value that you're expecting them to see at that point is going as expected. So the who is going to be really important. The date is going to be really important. We talk a lot about, and this will vary by company, but time to value. So if you have data around what time to value should be for your customers, or if you have just some assumptions that you're rolling on, that I think that customers who onboard within 30 days are way more successful than the customers that take 3 months to onboard, then you want to surface that information to those customers. You want to be prescriptive, and it's a great idea to just have those deadlines in place so the customer really knows. So with relation to process, it's really important to get a commitment. And I recommend doing it verbally. I recommend doing it in writing as well. So really taking the time to say, these are the things I need from you, customer. Can you commit to these? And having them say, yes, I will do these things. I will get my team to do these things. I will sign on this dotted line that these are the things that I need to do to be successful. I wouldn't call it a contract. It's not a service order. It's more just like an informal commitment that this is what, it's a prescriptive activity on the side of the company, I would say. And it's saying this is what you need to do. This is how you can help yourself. We want to help you, but there are some things that you need to do, because rarely is onboarding a one-sided thing. I've never seen it be a one-sided thing, really. People need to adapt behaviors, people need to adapt systems, people need to integrate whatever you're giving them into their workflows. So even when you're working with a system that doesn't have lengthy implementation, you're going to want to get that commitment. And then, this is actually something that's always been so frustrating to me when it hasn't happened, which is you've just spent 30 days with a customer, you've onboarded them, things are going great, and then you just find out that there's all these other stakeholders that you were missing, that you didn't do the assessment that needed to happen in the beginning, and now you need another training. You need to spend more company resources to get more people involved. And it's not like organic expansion. It's really just, oh no, I didn't know that there were more people who need to use this tool to really be successful at that company. So taking the time in the beginning, and this is part of the handoff as well, is to really understand all of the stakeholders on the customer side. Make sure you have their information, make sure they know what is expected of them throughout the whole process. So it's really helpful to have a map of all of those people. And maybe sometimes I know that's a CSM function. Other times, depending on your company and your organizational setup, sometimes account management might work more there if you have that segmentation between account management and customer success. So it really depends on you, but somebody should be doing this, making a map of all of your stakeholders. And then the last piece here for process is to really build in feedback. So one thing that happens is, especially with these like really ambitious CSMs too, you'll see it even where everybody has a whole bunch of boxes to check. You have this process that you've set up and I've checked all these boxes, so everything must be exactly as I expect it to be. Everything must be going the way that it should be because I was supposed to do these 5 things and I did these 5 things. But sometimes it doesn't, things don't go smoothly. Things change. Sometimes maybe a stakeholder changes at the company, so your champion leaves. during onboarding, or your goals and priorities change, or the customer's goals or priorities change, or a team member changes, and now suddenly you have a new CSM who has to take over for wherever this customer was in their onboarding process. So you really should have a checkpoint in that process, and I had it as like an implementation checkpoint on my journey. But it could be a survey that you incentivize CSMs to get filled out, for example. It can be an executive sponsor conversation for maybe some enterprise customers where there's a way to say, how are things going, and plans to course correct. And the reason that I really emphasize building this into the process is because if you don't, then you might run into the problem where somebody would say, well, I didn't know what I was supposed to do to fix this, so I just did nothing. And that's horrible for the customer experience and for the company. And we want to make sure that CSMs feel really supported and onboarding specialists feel really supported in terms of getting the resources they need when things aren't going the way that they might need to be going. So devising that check-in process and making sure that there's a way for any issues to be escalated to the right people who can really help. That's going to be pretty key.
Hey, Linda, we have a great question here about this in particular. We have the question, what specific questions do you recommend for this check-in and course correct conversation? What are good questions to prompt them to answer as well?
So you can start with a basic, even NPS, because it's always just a nice metric to have throughout the life cycle. So a net promoter score. Would you recommend SkillJar, Amity today, tomorrow to your friends, however you want to write that one? Pretty standard. And then I would say experience questions. So how would you rate your onboarding experience? Is there anything else that you feel you need to properly see value from the tool? Really explicit questions that help them identify their needs, I would say. And some of those questions will have really clear red flags. If somebody says, I rate my onboarding experience 2 out of 10, then that's like alarm bells should be ringing, and we need to figure out what went wrong. And other ones might be a 6 or 7, and you know, okay, we have some work to do. And then there's the question, okay, what could we have done to make this better? And when you're in that passive zone, sometimes there's not necessarily something that you're going to do to fix it for that particular customer today, but you can use that feedback to improve the process for other people. And also, it just gives you an opportunity to understand what's important to the customer at that point. So I think any of those kind of feedback-based questions are going to be really key, but you're going to want to keep it short. So I would probably keep it to less than 5 questions because you want to make it easy for people to answer. So just to sum that question up, I said NPS is always a helpful one as a benchmark to see how that's changing over time. A question explicitly rating the onboarding experience, an open-ended question around feedback or how could we have made this better. And also, it's always nice to ask for something that they loved too. So maybe a question around like what was great about this experience, and then you have great feedback to come back to your team and say you really nailed it on this aspect of the onboarding process for this customer. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, my pleasure. So another piece about process here is identifying what is most effective. Excuse me. And we talked a little bit about this already, what is most effective, and kind of talking to your product team and understanding what's most effective in onboarding. But once you decide what's most effective, that's what this is about. And we want to identify how we can really route customers into doing those great activities. So you're identifying what activities customers should be doing, and you're sending them reminders to do it. So set up some sort of structure in your process, and maybe that's a drip campaign, and you can work with your marketing colleagues to do that, or you can work with Amity or a tool that really kind of looks at behavior and says, or doesn't look at behavior, maybe it's time-based in this case, and you're sending out emails on a regular cadence and saying, hey, you've been here 2 weeks. Do this thing. Have you tried this thing? And it's a nice reminder for customers to get back in the product. You'll also take, just a note about drip campaigns. The impression people have is nobody looks at those. But that's actually not true, because I've often been the sender of these drip campaigns, and I would get tons of replies from customers. So they are invested. They're looking at emails from you because they're excited about their customer journey. They're excited about this new purchase. Everybody won't look at them naturally, but there are responses that come through from these drip campaigns. Did I do this right? Or I tried to do this and I was confused, or this is great. Just different kinds of feedback that come through from those drip campaigns. You can also think about making workflows in Salesforce, for example. I know that you can trigger emails in that way as well. And in-app messaging, I personally love Intercom. I plug for Intercom, and we use them here at SkillJar. So you can always just surface specific activity-based information depending on where they are in your application, if you're working in software, for example. So I love those auto messages where, oh, they hit this page for the first time, so we're going to pop a message up and tell them, do you need help? You can learn more about this page here, or what you have to do here in my help center or in my training portal. Or, oh, while you're here, try checking out this thing. So it's a really great opportunity to reinforce great behaviors. So I would take a look at what resources you have in your organization already, and see if there's any way that you can start building in that marketing aspect into onboarding. So I have another poll for you. And I'm currently just wondering what kind of training you offer. So maybe it's live training, maybe it's a screen share live training, not in person. Maybe you have some on-demand training. So I'm going to launch this poll. And you can select all that apply. So if you have several different pieces in your onboarding program today, I'm really curious about that. So a lot of people are doing screen shares, live trainings. There's a whole bunch doing in-person training as well. We have some on-demand training and some webinars. So there's a good bunch of people doing all of these activities. Webinars, I would say, look less popular. In-person training, less popular and very expensive. And there's about 3% who said none. I'm going to close the poll now. We had about 75% of the folks on the line answer. I'll share the results. So live training, screen shares, doesn't surprise me that this is the most popular type of training, just because of the fact that most of us are working in tech companies. A lot of the people on the line I know do come from software. So it does make sense that you would kind of screen share and do that training there. It's also much more economical than the in-person training. It's interesting, I see about 60% of the folks also do on-demand training. And, you know, I know a lot of SkillJar customers are on the line, so welcome to any of you who might have that on-demand training through SkillJar. And we talk a lot about how on-demand training can really support live training and how that medley is so key. Just because live training, we have a lot of retention issues, I notice, with students in live training. And as the person who's done hundreds and hundreds of live trainings, onboardings, there's very few things that are less exciting than when you've spent an hour on the phone with somebody and it's like pulling teeth to get them to engage with you. So it feels like, I personally, for live trainings, I hate having it be the Linda show. I really like having engagement and hearing from customers and being able to tailor my approach. So when that happens, I'm always like, I wish I had on-demand training, let's say, to really offer them. And I do here, so that's great. But it's just an approach to think about, because you really want to make sure, if you're doing these live trainings, once again, that you're getting feedback, that people are retaining information, and that you have a way to reinforce things. So thanks for your responses there. So product, P number 3. As I mentioned, this is not about the product that you're selling in terms of your software, let's say, or your service. This is really your customer success products. What are you offering people? Your CSMs, to some extent, are a product that you're offering. They're something that sometimes you charge for, probably. Other times, maybe it's included in a subscription. On-demand training, another thing. You can either provide that for free or you can charge for it, but it's another one of your products if you have it. Your help center, your FAQs, these are all aspects, products of your customer success organizations or help organizations, support organizations. And as I mentioned when we were just discussing that poll, it's really important to provide multiple ways for customers to learn. Everything we know about education and learning really says that different people learn in different ways and prefer to absorb information in different ways. I know that most customers that I would speak to on a live training will say, if I ask them how they're doing, they'll be like, oh, it all makes sense, but I really need to play around with it. I need to try it out. And that's a common thing. People learn by doing. So providing those opportunities, that's why on-demand training is a great thing to offer as well, where you can say, oh, you're in the product and you see this message and you want to learn how to use this more, you can hop over to this quick lesson and learn more deeply about it. And also having CSMs come and do live trainings for people who really have a lot of questions, and you will have those needy customers, right, who need more and more time to really absorb what you're trying to get across, especially if you're working with maybe non-technical folks. Sometimes live training is really helpful there too. And it gives people that comfort. So having that mix is going to be really essential. And by the way, this is where segmenting your customer base can be key. So maybe everybody doesn't get all of the different things you do. Maybe they have to pay for it, and then you start bringing in revenue for your services as well. So it's something to think about. And oftentimes I see people trying to segment their support and the services that their CSMs provide to customers without really building out the services that are needed in order to have that robust program. So it does pay to take some time at the beginning to sort out what products are we as a customer success organization going to offer this year, next year. How are we going to move towards further segmentation if that's a goal, and if you're really pressured to scale this year or next year based on your company's growth, for example, or the resources available for customer success. So providing multiple ways will help with segmentation.
Hey, Linda, we have a question here. Someone's actually asking if you can clarify what on-demand training entails.
Oh, yeah. So on-demand training is actually one of the biggest services that SkillJar provides. Basically, you load up content onto a learning management system, and you provide that to customers so that they can take it on their own time. So whereas a live training session happens at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, on-demand training is available for customers to access all the time. And you can charge for that too. You can say, provide a subscription and say you have access to on-demand training for the first 3 months of your customer journey with us, and maybe you can have access later if you want to pay for it, for example, an additional cost. So there are different ways that people work on-demand training, but the essence is that it's available for you at any time, and it's there for you to consume. Sometimes people call it e-learning as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. And then another part of the product, and this should be just kind of like a product feature of the services that you provide, is that you should be learning from the handoff. So I mentioned organizational memory, retaining information about the customer. If you're interacting with somebody, you're going to want to use that information to tailor your onboarding process and training to the use case whenever possible. And this just makes the customer feel special. I think it gives them a better experience. I really think that everybody's had the experience where they're sitting through a training and there's just like 10 minutes where somebody's talking and it's just totally irrelevant to you, or you know it already, or you've been there, or you've done that. And being able to say, is this interesting? Is this something that you can see yourself using before diving into something, is really helpful. And on-demand training also provides that opportunity too. So you can create pathways for learners to follow, or highlight certain courses for certain types of users or certain types of goals. So really thinking like, what are people trying to accomplish in their first few weeks with my product? How can I guide them towards accomplishing that? By the way, this is like, I guess if you know the term data dump, this is like the opposite of a data dump, where you're really providing tailored content. So you're really making sure that everything's hyper relevant to people. And with your on-demand training as well, you can promote different courses after somebody's finished something. So for example, you can say, oh, you did, we know that you've learned about this, so now we want to surface this additional information. And on-demand training also doesn't live in a vacuum. You can also use that to inform your CSMs about what their customers have already learned, what interests them. They can look at the data around what kinds of coursework people are taking. So that just really improves the experience, I think, for a customer and keeps them engaged and makes them feel like a partner rather than just a cog in a wheel. So those are our 3 Ps: that people, process, and product. And now I just have a few additional tips that I want to share with you. Specifically, if you're going to invest in a training program, it's really worthwhile to make an effort to understand how training is impacting behavior. So this is really kind of about showing the ROI on all of the initiatives you have around training. And that starts with incorporating sticky activities into a customer health score, for example. So saying, hey, we drove these activities, and when people do this activity, we know that this is a healthy customer. And then saying, do people who take training do more of these activities? So this involves app tracking. And once again, this is something that you can involve your product team in because it's going to benefit everybody, where you can really see how do certain customers interact with the products and how does training encourage specific behaviors. So really looking at those correlations. So using data from an LMS to understand what's been learned, and engaging with those product teams and other teams that are directly involved with product adoption. Everybody should be invested in product adoption in your whole company. And then I already mentioned this, but train your teams well. Onboarding doesn't happen by accident. As I mentioned, it is so much more effective when it's a prescriptive process. And it's not just your CSMs who need to know about onboarding. Your AEs need to prepare your customers for this journey. So in the sales process, they have to be really informed about what onboarding looks like. It's as important as product knowledge, that process. So making sure you're surfacing that to your sales teams so that they can really, quote, sell onboarding. Even if you're not charging for it, they need to get the customer pumped up for that experience. And really making sure that your team, the CS team, knows the steps to success as well. So spend time training on the handoff, spend time training on onboarding, make sure that everybody knows the talking points and how customers are successful. I love the term, and I use it all the time. We found that customers that do these things, X, Y, and Z, are way more successful than customers who don't. So even just surfacing that and planting that seed for customers incentivizes them to really do those things. They want to be successful. So be prescriptive. Customers are really open to your advice in this phase, and they want to know how they can be successful with the investment that they just made. And it might be a large investment depending on the price of your product, in which case, naturally, you're even more invested as a company in each individual's customer success if you have less customers. So really got to knock it out of the park. So before we move into the official Q&A section, and you can start setting in your questions now as we finish up, the main takeaways here are nail the handoff, set those expectations, and get buy-in from the customer verbally, in writing. Provide multiple ways for customers to learn and seek out information so that they can really easily understand how to use your product, and leverage data that you have available to you to evaluate impact. And that, as I mentioned, could be from app tracking or Amity or SkillJar, training LMS data. Any data that you have around the customer experience, try and gather it, try and get access to it, and see what kind of resources you can put together to really make data-driven decisions, evaluate impact, and course correct when needed. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mathilde for some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. We already have some questions, so I would encourage everyone to send us their questions still. We'll try to answer as many as possible. But here, let's start here. So once that you've gotten, Jim is asking, once you've gotten the agreement to get the customer to commit to deadlines and things like that, how do you make sure that they stay on track? I think you talked about check-ins. Is there anything else that you can do to make sure your customer does what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, I think check-ins are going to be a key part of that. So just scheduling conversations where you talk about it, or weekly update emails that you can even automate to some extent with the template, with those deadlines that you have. So just make sure that you constantly surface that commitment back to the customer. And because they've signed on and they know about it, it's helpful because they naturally want to stay on track. And that will also give them the opportunity to say, you know, I actually can't get this done this week and I need to reevaluate this timeline, which will happen and it's fine, as long as you know about it and you can make sure that everything's still on track and that you can adjust and stay flexible there. So yes, check-ins, maybe they're weekly, maybe they're monthly, depending on the needs. Emails, either automated or sent by the CSM on a weekly, bi-weekly basis with updates about their progress. And you can even go so far as to red, yellow, green a spreadsheet, for example. So if you have missed a deadline, you can highlight that in red so that it's really obvious to the customer. And when they've made a deadline, it's great to highlight that in green, and that's good for you and for them, because sometimes it's not only the customers that miss their deadlines, sometimes we miss deadlines too, right? And there are certain things that a customer is waiting on from us, and we want to make sure that we're sticking to those SLAs that we're setting up with them. So those are a few ways that I would recommend.
Awesome, thanks. We have another question here. Can you talk about the pushback that some people might have towards learning and using new technology and software for onboarding?
Yeah, sometimes you will get pushback, right? There are some real traditionalists. I think that education can overcome that pushback. So once again, that prescriptive nature of saying customers who do this are more successful. So it's in your best interest to spend some time going over this. And if there's fear around that or pushback, maybe it's as simple as like a 15-minute experience where you say, like during the kickoff call, are you comfortable like hopping into our on-demand training center? And if the answer is, I don't know, then it's like, well, you know what? Let me give you a tour of that. So let's spend like 5 minutes just going through what's available to you, and I'll show you exactly how you use it. And that could alleviate some of that fear around the new technology. But I know, for example, one benefit of specifically SkillJar is that it's very easy to use for students. So there's not really a lot of difficulty that people have getting into the system and using it. Providing support when needed and responding swiftly when people have issues. So no on-demand training center exists without some sort of like place that people can go to reach out to if they need assistance. And that's usually a support team, and usually they man that too. And we luckily don't get a lot of requests from end users, but you do see it on occasion, and you just need to be there so that they feel supported and they know that if they try this new thing, they're able to get what they need if they need it. And I know I saw another question that was around automating onboarding for certain types of customers, which is where you'll get a lot of this feedback, right? So maybe you have like SMB customers, and they're small, and you really want to make sure that they're using on-demand training, and you're trying to make sure that you're saving your CSM resources for your enterprise customers, let's say. I'm all for automated onboarding for these customers, and once again, as long as they feel supported. So that might be guides and resources around using these. I think support comes from really mapping out that journey as well, so they really know what to expect and what they need to do, and that can alleviate some of that pushback, I think.
Awesome, thanks. We have a lot of awesome questions right here. So Cassandra is asking, we have onboarding streams, but wondering how much is too much. We found that a way to onboard, but the next step is usage and adoption. So besides surveying, how do you get people to use and then keep using?
In terms of getting people to use and keep using your product, onboarding sets the foundation for that. But what I think you're thinking of is really behavioral reinforcement. So to some extent, understanding when it's not happening is going to be really key, because you will have the customers who are going to be super users from the moment that they walk through your door and they want to adopt. And then you'll have other customers who will want to adopt also, but things get in the way, or as I mentioned, things change, and oops, a month went by and I didn't actually log in even once to SkillJar. What do I do now? And that's where just making sure that you have a tool in place to understand how that's going. So the app tracking, for example, that shows you logins, or I know Intercom, once again, has some tools around that too. You can go ahead and say, this person hasn't logged in for a whole month, and like this is a risk. And maybe that's part of your customer health score as well, where you can say, oh no, we need to re-engage with this individual. So maybe that's a monthly check-in. I also would recommend creating product challenges to some extent. So if you can be super prescriptive, and after onboarding or training have very clear calls to action, like around, let's say, for example, oh, you sent, if it's a marketing automation tool, you sent 10 emails this month, like, congratulations, you did great. So having CSMs be able to check in on data and usage, and praise customers that are doing really well, and check in with customers who aren't doing what they need to do, and say, what's going on? Like, having those real conversations, that's where those check-ins come in. Because to me, onboarding isn't just training. Onboarding is getting to that place where you're really like adopted. I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Awesome, thanks. Tracy here is asking, do you have any suggestions for targeting contacts who go in the dark during the onboarding process?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because unfortunately you can't force anybody to reply to you, but you can avoid that a little bit by creating that commitment, and gathering stakeholders. So ideally, if you know more than one person at a company, and it's really dangerous anyway to be single-threaded with a customer, you really want to make sure you have a few contacts that you could reach out to if you ever need to. So that's one piece of advice, first of all, to make that stakeholder map that I referred to before, so that, oh, like, main contact, John isn't responding to me, but I have this other contact who I might be able to check in with as well, and sending a gentle note and ask, like, how are things going for you, and seeing if you can get John's colleague on the line instead, because maybe John's out of the office, or maybe John is just really busy and his priorities change, but you know that you have other people who are using the products in that organization. That's one key. And then mapping the journey, because creating that commitment, having that like verbal or written contract, helps people understand what's expected of them. I think that does prevent some of like the going dark. So I think that there are some proactive activities that you can take to avoid that experience. Although I don't really know, I don't have any techniques for re-engaging with somebody should they, let's say, just stop talking and you can't get back in touch with them, other than keep trying and hold on. But ideally, you'll just have more contacts at a company, and you'll go through that process, and you'll spend the time early.
Awesome. A question here is, what is your take on getting people to pay for the training? And do you think that it tends to motivate the customers to be more engaged during onboarding?
That's a great question, and something that I think about every single day, because customers ask us that all the time. I think in the current customer success climate, we often have a situation now where, oh, sorry, I hear myself back a little bit, I think. Hopefully there's no echo.
I can't hear an echo, so I think you're good.
Perfect. Thanks. So in the current customer success climate, because customers really expect you to make them successful, especially with recurring revenue models where you rely on that success in order to get your renewals and to maintain that revenue, people do expect some degree of onboarding to be free. And I was doing another webinar with a contact of ours over at Success Hacker, and he was saying how you wouldn't buy a microwave and expect it to come without a manual of how to use it. So there's that expectation that somebody will show you how to use something, but at the same time, you also wouldn't buy a microwave and expect like somebody to come to your house and give you some key advice on how to make this dish in your microwave, let's say, for example. So I think that example to me emphasizes the fact that there are some things that you can give for free and some things that you could charge more for. And you should really do your due diligence in the beginning to understand exactly what is really like the basic things that somebody needs to know that you really should provide to them, because without that, there's not a single chance that they'll be successful. But then for super user, power user kind of conversations where you're really going above and beyond or doing in-person training, that's where I think you can really leverage charging for training to recoup some of your costs. So it's a complicated question, and it depends on your customers and how simple your product is to use. But I would also really encourage you to try it out, because no pricing model is permanent. So if you wanted to try out pricing out training and it's totally not working, your sales team is going to give it away for free, most likely anyhow, which we see a lot with customer success packages, where they'll throw it in because it's an easy one to write off and give a discount for. So depending on your organization, it will vary, but I am a big fan of a blended model where you charge for some things and you give out some things for free. It's goodwill. It gets people excited about the training that you're offering as well, so that you can say, oh, this was such great training that now I trust that any education services or packages that I'll buy from this organization are great. So I feel good about paying for them. I'll get value.
Great. So we have 2 questions right here that I want to ask you together. So the first one is, would you recommend only having one CSM involved with a customer, or do you think that having multiple CSMs handling onboarding process could also be successful? And the second question on top of that would be, should every customer success team have a dedicated onboarding specialist?
Ooh, good questions. So unfortunately, it depends, but there's not a right answer, but I'll tell you some of the considerations that I take when thinking about this. So first of all, should multiple CSMs be involved? I think it depends on the size of the customer. I think that if you're working with really big enterprise customers, they expect a dedicated person that they can call and that they know is their person at your company, their partner. But if you have an incredibly extensive implementation process that might get really complex, for example, and the CSMs are doing that, and there's niche knowledge, and let's say it's really not practical for each CSM to have all of that responsibility and have all of that knowledge, then you might need multiple stakeholders involved. I also see a lot of the time with like SMB customers, or just in general, like small dollar contracts where you'll have multiple CSMs or support folks involved, because there's not that expectation. They don't mind who they're reaching out to. It's less of that partnership. So bigger customers usually require a dedicated individual, even if they're quarterbacking and bringing in other folks. And that's kind of how I think about the CSM in general, as the quarterback who decides what needs to happen to get the ball over to the end zone. That's the extent of my sports knowledge, sorry. But they decide what needs to happen, and then they recruit whatever resources they need and find whatever they need to find throughout the organization to make sure that happens. So I do like that model for bigger customers. Now, the second question also depends, do you need an onboarding person? As an onboarding person, and somebody who kind of focuses on training and education, I see value, especially when there's extensive implementation needed, to have somebody who really has an understanding of, first of all, how people learn. So if you're doing training sessions, making sure that there's somebody available who has some sort of insight into adults learning and how that works and what that looks like and what best practices they can bring to the organization. And they can actually oftentimes serve as a big resource for your CSMs who might not have that knowledge, and they can provide that for them and do some sessions on helping adults learn, for example. So there's a benefit there. But if this needs to be an exclusive resource, I think really varies based on how extensive implementation is. So if it's a big deal, if implementation requires a lot of behavioral changes or a lot of teaching or technology changes in a company, then yes, you're going to want to have somebody managing that process. A lot of the time that will be a trainer. Other times that will be like a project manager, like an implementation specialist or an implementation manager who's really focused on just making sure that that whole plan that we talked about at length today gets done. So that's the person checking in on the project. And maybe they're not communicating all of those check-ins with the customer themselves. Maybe the CSM is doing that with them. It really depends on the relationship you want to foster with your customers. I believe the CSM should be involved throughout, but at least for the big at least for the big customers, so that they can really provide that quarterbacking experience and score the touchdowns that you need to, like getting them to value, getting everybody to value. And so I would say those are the considerations that I would think about when I'm making those decisions, but it will really vary depending on your company.
Awesome. So it's 55. Maybe we have some time to take maybe one or two extra questions. So we do have a comment here. It's not really a question, but Aaron is saying, going back to whether or not you should charge someone for onboarding, for training later on. It's a pretty good comment saying that if they know they'll have to pay for additional training later on, maybe they'll pay more attention during onboarding. So
yeah, that's true too. So like one best practice, and that actually back to that question, because it is one of my favorites. um, does it incentivize, actually, that was the actual question, does it incentivize customers? And charging for training can incentivize customers more, absolutely. But it's risky, as I mentioned, so it's something to think about. And I love that model where it's like, we'll provide this opportunity for you for free or included in your contract value for the first however many days that you want to offer that. And then that does put a little bit of the pressure on to make sure that they're doing all the things they need to do, and that can help with the project planning.
awesome. One question here is life after onboarding. Do you recommend following up in 60 or 90 days after onboarding to see how they're doing? And if so, what are the things that you want to be checking and asking?
Yeah, that's when I would do like an onboarding experience survey, possibly, if that's something that another data point that you want for your company. It depends on how you did that checkpoint earlier. But absolutely, you want to check in. And the best way to check in is to use data and come informed. So like SkillJar, for example, we can say probably by 90 days, we're going to do our first quarterly business review. Our CSMs will do that. And they'll come with data and they'll see exactly how many like users are using training or where they are in launch, and they'll be able to have that discussion and say, this is where we were hoping you would be today. But we see that and this is based on goals. So we didn't even talk about goal setting here, but you should definitely align on goals with your customers, especially for your larger customers. So then you can say, this is where you're tracking based on your goals. This is where we'd like you to be if you're not there. And then it provides an opportunity to have a real conversation around like, well, what can we be doing differently as a customer in terms of usage? Or it opens the floor for the customer to say, we really want to use this, but this is just not working for us, and this is why. And then you have product feedback, or you have an opportunity to educate that user, because a lot of the time sometimes people are misinformed. So it's a good opportunity. And yes, I would say check-ins are very useful, and that's a really good, I don't know if you're doing quarterly business reviews, whoever asked that, but it's a good opportunity to say, have that quarterly business review 3 months in, let's say, and assess how things are going based on the goals and where people should be tracking.
Awesome. So it's 58. Maybe we have time for one more question. Are you okay with that, Linda?
Yeah.
Awesome. So last questions, and thank you so much, everyone, for sending us so many questions for the Q&A. I'm sorry if Linda didn't get to answer your question, but here's one last one. How do you make sure that the lines don't get too blurry between the onboarding person and the CSM during onboarding?
Yeah, that's where the roles in the people comes in, where like at the handoff, you're saying, these are the people and this is exactly what they're here to help you with. So presenting that information, and I mentioned this, but like reiterating it. So providing it in writing, having it mentioned on the kickoff call. So really just repeating yourself. I think repeating, like everybody should be prepared to repeat themselves with customers, and that's going to be the best way to really get them to get the information that you need, and be really patient about it, because I mean, I forget tons of things, so it's nice to get reminders, and it's an expectation that a lot of customers, I think, have. So that's definitely one way, is kind of setting that expectation. And also there's ways to gently, like when a question comes to the wrong person, or somebody's trying to engage with the implementation specialist long after they're done, it's a gentle email where it's like, thanks for reaching out, like Rachel will be happy to help you with this particular question, and referring them back to their CSM, let's say. So just making sure that you're reinforcing behavior and the way you need it to happen, and and that you're telling the customer what they need to do so that they can do it right next time. And if there are any questions that I didn't answer and you want to engage with me, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Linny Schwab, or you can hit us. You can email us or you can tweet us at Skilljar, and I'll get that message. And you can also email me at linda@skilljar.com, and I'm happy to keep this conversation going. I love talking about onboarding, and I love hearing what different people are doing as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. That was truly fantastic. And reminding everyone, we will be sending the recording and the slides. So you'll be able to rewatch and share. And if you want to be starting your new onboarding program, then you can share it with your team and your management team or anything. But yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for everyone for joining us today. And Linda, thank you so much again for this awesome presentation.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for joining, and I look forward to hearing from all of you later.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day, everyone. And thanks for being with us today.